G'day everyone, I'm Smokescreen and welcome back to another video, and here we go with the beginning of the journey, the beginning of the official GT World Series for 2022. We kick off with the Manufacturers Series, and because this is the official season, we have to sort of choose a car that will be stuck with us for the majority of the year, so we have to choose correctly. A couple of different cars were on my shortlist, such as Mercedes and Toyota, Jaguar, and Porsche even, but I decided to go back to Old Faithful and go with Genesis once again. So we have the Genesis X Group 3 and the Genesis G70 Group 4, and you may be wondering, why have you chosen Genesis again? Well, I actually happen to think these are nice cars, just in general. I happen to actually really think the Genesis X is a pretty good looking car as well. I know how these cars drive in this game too, having driven them for the last couple of test seasons, and they've also become official partners of Gran Turismo, so I won't really expect to see these cars be performing very poorly. I've also got fan-made liveries as well, so a couple of different reasons there. And if you're watching, Scotty, of course, once again, thank you very much for the liveries. I'm going to be running the liveries for the first block of the season. There's 2 blocks of races in this official season. I think the first block is 6 races, and the second block is 10. I'll run these fan liveries for the first one here, so you get to see them as soon as possible. And obviously, yeah, they first fan-made livery, so they hold a special place in my heart. What doesn't hold such a special place is today's track, Nürburgring 24 Hour, because last time we were here, we decided to actually bin off a really good result at the Dip of Death. That was back in GT Sport, driving the BMW M4 Group 4 car. We're here in Group 3 today, and we're completing this first qualifying lap of the slot here, and it's actually the only one we get as well, because the lap is so long. But we're in Group 3, so the cars are a little bit faster, a little bit sketchier. Alright. Okay. That's alright. We still set ourselves a decent lap though, pretty good for provisional 5th position. By the start of the race, somebody jumped us up ahead and we find ourselves pushed down into 6th. But given the quality of drivers in this split, I'm still not particularly unhappy with my qualifying lap there. I was looking for basically anything under an 8:10, and I think I set an 8:08 or something, so it was pretty good. But you can have a look at the drivers: Iqbal, Metal Gear, Psydorg, a couple of Japanese drivers. I haven't heard of the 2 up ahead of me, but I'm sure they're quality drivers. I've got Chupaghetti behind, who's another quality driver, and he's normally a little bit quicker than me on most days. On that particular qualifying session, though, I managed to just qualify ahead of him there. But as we head through this opening section of the Nürburgring 24 Hour, so the opening section at the 24 Hour circuit is the GP circuit, we're just struggling a little bit. We've dropped off the pack up ahead, so the 5 cars ahead of us have extended that gap out to beyond the slipstream range, and Chupaghetti is actually closing. Chupa's in the Subaru, so that's a pretty solid Group 3 car. We're in this Genesis. Now, the Genesis, when it was first introduced, was an extremely sketchy car. You basically had to go like 30% throttle until you were pointed straight, otherwise you were going to instantly spin out. It's been improved quite a bit, and you can actually drive it kind of normally now, which is good, I guess. But, you know, combined with the hard tyres we're on today, so we're doing a no-stop on the hards, and the full tank of fuel, and the relatively cool temperatures out on the circuit with all the cloud cover, plus the cold tyres at the start of the race, it makes for quite a slippery outing on the GP circuit on this first rendition, and I'm just falling victim to that. Chupaghetti sees this gap up the inside, a little bit of a bump out of the way, and he manages to make that move stick. I lose a further position as well. Now, that particular move there, you may look at it on my end and go, oh dear, that looked like a bit of a bump and run, but I had a look from Chupaghetti's perspective on his stream, and there was actually a little bit of lag between us, and I don't even think that he felt the contact, so I'm gonna forgive him completely for that one. But I was sitting here now, and I'm just thinking, well, I wouldn't even be in this position if I didn't do so crap in the GP section, so I had a pretty poor start to this race, and I'm now stuck behind Chupaghetti and this Lexus driven by Yama. Qualified ahead of both of them, so on paper, I'm probably a little bit quicker than them. Chupa's normally quicker than me in a race, but as you can see here, I'm not so sure about this Lexus because I ran into the back of him heading up into the Adenauer Force chicane now, so I'm starting to get the feeling that I'm being held up slightly. We've got to make sure we get a good exit here. sacrifice the left-hand portion to get a better run out of the right. Yama gets a kick of oversteer, which perhaps gives us a little bit of a look in at a move coming up to the following corner. I go to the inside. It's a very narrow part of the track and not a part of the track where you traditionally go for an overtake, but I decided to have a go at the chance while it presented itself to me. I gave him racing room and he was able to keep that 7th position there, but I thought I may as well have a go. So the race is going, I guess, okay, but it goes swiftly down the drain as we get a kick of oversteer and we just graze that outside curb, which completes it. Oh, damn it.
Oh shit, here we go again.
So last time we were here, we binned the BMW, and now we've binned the Genesis. There's also, oh, look at that for a crash. Valiant Vendetta driving the Lexus as well. Just has an absolute mammoth accident. But that's going to be our first position gain once we find ourselves in last position. Umami East is going to be the second one. Makes a hash of the tier gut section. We're flashing Zach Lukey to see if he's kind enough to get out of the way. And he is, with a little bit of right blinker action. Love a bit of indicator action. That's us up into 13th. When I flash the headlights to try and get past somebody like that, they are by no means obliged to actually move out of the way, but a lot of people will kind of comply with it and do it anyway, so I may as well flash the headlights to see if I'm lucky enough to be against a driver that will do that for me, because if I flash the headlights and somebody chooses to move out of the way, that's not my fault, so I will happily take advantage of that if the situation presents itself. And Zach Lukey was kind enough on that occasion to see that I had swiftly gained, and I just complied with the overtake. I've caught up to a second Honda here, Arta 8-43, and we're on the GP circuit, and I've caught up to this guy quite quickly, having recovered from my incident, so I want to try and get past him as quick as possible to make sure I don't get stuck behind him in the Nordschleife section. We're heading up towards Michael Schumacher S. We're on the wrong side, so I sacrificed the entry to get a better exit. I switched to the outside on the exit, which gives us the inside for the upcoming left-hander. Make sure we get the car stopped on the apex and don't run him out of road. We get it stopped beautifully. He hangs it around the outside even, gives him the inside for the following turn. He goes in narrow, which hopefully means he gets a poor exit. I get a straighter exit with a little lick of slipstream here. Switch to the inside, which gives me the inside for this kink halfway down the back straight, and that shortening of the distance down there is just enough, plus the little bit of straight line speed advantage I seem to have on the Honda just helps me complete that move before we head up the inside of the NGK chicane, heading up through this last, or the beginning, the third lap. But as we reach the end of the third lap, I quickly realise something. I'm going to have to leave to get to the next slot. I didn't have enough time to actually complete this race and meet the entry for the next slot. I've obviously been this race and I'm racing for 12th, so the points for this particular position will probably be like 150 if I'm lucky, and that's not really a points haul that I'm going to settle for. So I decided to actually leave that race in order to make this second slot, which I indeed do. So we're in for another slot. We've so far picked up a fat donut in terms of points here, and I decided to have a bit of a spin on my outlap. It's only the outlap, so it's not a disaster, but that's just going to be a pressure point I'm going to have to watch out for on my main qualifying lap. I was always going to do this as well. I've quit back to the pits, and what that's done is given me a good amount of track position ahead. It's given me a load of clear circuit ahead. That's probably about a 2-minute gap to the to the next car up the road, and that gap's going to be much larger to their main peloton. They've all spread out to start their qualifying runs, but you can see here everybody's going to be in that pack, sort of nose to tail. They'll have a bit of a gap, but as soon as someone makes a mistake, you'll catch up to them and then they'll ruin your qualifying lap. So I don't want anything to do with it. If I don't get out of the pits first, I'd rather be 2 minutes off the back. And that's the good thing about a qualifying session here at Nürburgring GP, Nürburgring 24-hour rather, is they give you a good 12 minutes to complete your outlap. Normally a lap's about 8 minutes long, so you've got a 4-minute buffer to try and find yourself some track position. So I'm going to use half of it and find myself off the back here. So we're going to begin this qualifying lap now. This is our only lap. Don't worry about the weather, it's all good. And you may have seen me flicking back and forth between the weather radar and the normal radar, because there's a little bit of a rain band coming in from the top right of the weather radar, which isn't ideal. I think that's meant to show the northeast, coming in from the northeast section of the radar. And that's not good, because I don't want to get stuck in a rainstorm with my qualifying lap. Obviously, everyone ahead of me is 2 minutes up the road, so they're easily going to complete their qualifying lap before the rain hits, which means that their whole lap has got to be in the dry conditions. I was worried that I'd sort of left that cancel back to the pits a bit too late, and I was now going to get stuck in the rain. I was really worried about that. Obviously, if you get stuck in the rain, you've got less grip for whatever portion of the lap you have left when the rain hits. So you're probably going to lose time to a lot of people that have managed to get through that section in the dry conditions. But I was sort of holding on. You'll see as we flick here, there's actually a couple of darker splotches of blue, because there's a band, and then a little bit up towards the top, a little bit north of the circuit, there was this little splotch of rain, and in the middle of there was some darker cloud, and it did look like the trajectory of that weather system was going to be heading over the top of us, so I think we're going to get lucky in that regard. But I can be thankful that the main band of the rain is relatively light, relatively thin, and relatively slow moving, so it gives us the best possible chance to actually get as much of this lap done before that hits. We find ourselves coming up towards the halfway stage. We've got about an 8-minute 10 lap time here, and we have hit the 4-minute mark right as we exit the siphon, heading down towards a tricky couple of corners there. The weather is still a little bit further away, and there's actually a car going through Arenberg right now. I think I would be quite worried if I was in his position, being that much further back on the lap. A little bit of oversteer here, but we still managed to get this lap pretty decently. A little bit of sprinkling of rain. Maybe able to hear it, or am I hearing things? I don't know, but you can see we've zoomed in on that weather radar, and the weather's quite close. It looks as though at this stage that, oh, there's a massive moment there heading into Stylestrek as we head up towards the carousel. That was close. We've just nicked the curb on the entry, and it flung the car to the inside. We just about managed to catch it, but that's how close we are pretty much all the time at bidding a lap here at the Nürburgring. But let's see how good we can get this twisty flowing section at the end of this qualifying lap. So turn up the volume and have a listen to the Genesis X in all its auditory glory. Pretty decent run through that section, actually. We met pretty much every apex, didn't have any glaring errors, and that's probably the most difficult section to get right, because you have so many corners following on one after the other. You get one wrong, you're going to get them all wrong. But we managed to get through there okay. We get a good run down the straight and a good run through Tiergarten. So apart from that obvious glaring error at Stylestrek, it's been a fairly decent lap. And as we come up towards the line, it's going to be an 8:07, which is actually better than my first slot time. It's actually better than my last one, and I made mistakes. Oh, okay. And we're provisionally 6th from that effort. Let's see where that puts us after the Manufacturers Series introduction. I wonder how much Porsche paid Gran Turismo for that close-up. But anyway, lovely new graphics for the Manufacturers Series introduction. But back to the race, we're down in 7th. We got jumped by one player, but it wasn't anybody that we were going to actually qualify ahead of any day of the week. It was actually the pole sitter, M2 versus Mario, that jumped us. That was also the car that was way back at Arenberg. I was saying I would be worried if I were him in terms of the rain. He obviously had nothing to worry about, and he set himself an absolutely blistering pole position time of about an 8-minute point something. So pretty fast driver up in the lead there, and that's pushed us down into 7th. But as I mentioned previously, a top 10 in the Manufacturers Series is pretty much where I need to be and where I aim to be. Maybe I didn't say that previously. Well, I'm saying it now. The top 10 in the Manufacturers, now they're also combined with the Asia region, so we're Asia, Oceania for Manufacturers, and just Oceania in Nations Cup. I'm probably not going to be fighting for podiums in Manufacturers Series unless I find myself in a lower down split. But in this kind of split, a top 10 is probably where I need to be. So us sitting here in 7th isn't honestly too bad at all. You can see at the start of this race, the gaps ahead and behind are opening up. We've cleaned up this GP circuit section at the start of this race, learning quite a bit from that first slot, obviously, that the car is a lot more slippery on the opening stages of the race. We've learned from that, and we've managed to clean up that section, and that gap behind has opened to 1 second. So we're out of the slipstream of the car behind, we're out of the slipstream of the car ahead, and that was honestly the story for that entire first lap. All the way up until the end here, when Mia-san just missed a couple of apexes, and the gap closed down again. It was sort of hovering at about 1.2, 1.3 for the majority of the lap, and as we head through the Klein's Carousel, we actually get a bad Klein's Carousel there. The gap opens back up to 1.2. Mia-san gets a poor Galgenkopf, however, and this is the much more important corner to get right if you're looking to get a really good run down the 2 kilometre. Let's go. Come on. Come on, Genesis. I'm not gaining. Come on. Come on, little Jenny. Down this dotting a hoa here. I've managed to get myself within the slipstream thanks to Mia-san's mistake. The slipstream range now being a second, although much weaker in GT7 compared to GT Sport. And it's not quite going to be enough to gain that whole gap down the back straight. But it's going to be enough to get pretty close to him to the point where we may be able to get a move done somewhere on the GP circuit. If you want to get a move done as quickly as possible around this track, save it for the GP circuit, because that is where you're going to get the overtake done as quickly as possible with losing as minimal amount of time as possible. The entire Nordschleife section is so narrow and so twisty with pretty short braking zones because it's such a flowing racetrack. It's quite difficult to get past, but the GP circuit is a lot more traditional in terms of the fact, in terms of its sort of corner makeup. It's got a lot more hairpins, a lot more heavy braking zones into sharp corners, and it makes the track a pretty good overtaking track as well, because we have this bit of a straight where we can slipstream Mia-san and try and get a move done down into the Dunlop hairpin at the bottom. However, being 6/10 behind, we haven't got the full effects of the slipstream. I seem to find that as soon as the slipstream range opens up beyond 6/10, the slipstream strength significantly weakens to the point where it starts to become quite difficult to actually remain in the slipstream. And as you can see through Michael Schumacher S here, that gap opened up from about 7/10 to almost a second, and a second is the slipstream range. So, it's gone there. The slipstream's gone. We've got 1.1 seconds now because we didn't quite get the best left-hander just earlier, and it's now put us out of the slipstream range. The gap behind is 3.8, so once again we find ourselves with some air gaps ahead and behind for the entirety of lap 2. On this, pretty much the exact same spot on lap 3, we meet back with the action to find that the gap ahead has opened up to 2.5, but the gap behind has closed down to 1.9, and I was a lot more worried about Ramil Scarlett than I was of actually keeping Mia-san within touching distance, because Ramil Scarlett on most days is quite a bit faster than me, and I would say I think he's beat me every time we've been in a race together, and he's not going to let that streak go today because he's quite quickly catching. He was 3.5 seconds heading down the back straight of the GP section, on lap 2, and then heading down the GP section of lap 3, he closed that gap to about 1.9, and as we've entered the Nordschleife loop, that gap's down to 1.1. So I'm looking at the gap, and I'm quaking in my boots at the prospect of Ramil Scarlett catching up and attempting an overtake on this section of track. So I'm kind of thinking at this stage, well, if he catches right up to me, I'm just going to let him go, because I can probably gain a lot more by taking advantage of some of his slipstream if we just sort of work together and not fight too much. Also, I run the risk of being binned off the track or binning myself off the track if I try and fight for position on this Nordschleife loop. But as we head around here, a couple of wipes of the wipers there, so maybe there's a little bit of rain on the way, or there is a bit of rain on the way, but maybe some hovered over the track for a brief second. But as we head through over the crest into the Arenberg corner, have a look behind. Ramil Scarlett exits stage left, just completely slides. Oh dear.
Oh dear.
And whatever he's done to end up in that particular situation comes to my advantage, because that gap behind is now opened up to 5.5. I don't really have to worry about any pressure from behind now. But it's not the end of the pressure for this lap, because as we sort of plunge down into this downhill section on the middle part of the circuit, that's a couple of drops of rain. The rain has hit, so throughout the first half of the race there was a similar rain band like there was in qualifying approaching the track, and because the race is in the afternoon, it's now fallen to night time just as this rain band has hit. So we now find ourselves on the Nürburgring halfway through a lap with the rain hitting at night on slick tyres. So it really couldn't be much worse in terms of optimal conditions to be in right now. But thankfully at this stage it does look like Mia-san's perhaps not practiced the wet conditions, and maybe he's not quite up to the same pace as he was in the dry. Quite clearly for most of this race he is faster than me, but as soon as this rain has hit, he's starting to drive a lot more carefully, and that gap is down to 1.8. It was about 2.5 seconds on the back straight of the Nürburgring GP circuit on the beginning of this lap. But that rain band's passing. There's not much that can go wrong through this flat out section, but then this corner can go wrong quite easily. Something to note as well is you can see the water, the surface moisture indicator on the left hand side of the tyre wear. It hasn't even reached that first increment yet. And something to note as well is that the grip seems to drop off in stages in the wet weather. So we've really got to wait for that moisture to go beyond the first increment on the moisture surface indicator to actually feel a decrease in grip. So I think maybe Mia-san hasn't quite practiced that, because he seems to be driving a lot more carefully, whereas at this stage, because that moisture is below the first increment, we pretty much have similar grip levels to how we do in the full dry conditions. But I think Mia-san is maybe taking things a little bit too carefully, and he's starting to hemorrhage time as the rain continues. It seems that rain band has passed over the top of us now. We've managed to get through there okay. The moisture on the track has not gone beyond what these slick tyres are capable. Oh dear, bit of an oversteer as we hit the curb on the inside. Right as I'm saying, the tyres sort of did a decent job of traversing the little bit of moisture that's currently on the track. We make a huge mistake, and that gap to Mia-san has opened back up to 1 second. It was 8/10 before. And I'm kind of just thinking at this stage, if only that rain lasted a little bit longer, because maybe that would have put Mia-san really, really close to me, and I would have been almost guaranteed to get past on the Dottinger Hoa, which we're coming up to shortly. But there's still a bit of moisture on the track, so maybe Mia-san is still taking that into effect. Oh, bit of a moment there. Oh my god, that was close. Almost lost with the dip of death. That's where we crashed our BMW, and we've nearly crashed this brand new Genesis X. Obviously don't want to do that, so thankfully we've got through there okay. But we're coming up to the last couple of corners before we're going to head out onto that 2 kilometre back straight, and the gap to Mia-san is 1.3. He misses that left-hand apex there, and that's a crucial corner to miss, because that gap's now down to 0.8 of a second. Let's get a good Klein's carousel. Nice and gentle on the power on the exit, and that gap is 7.5 at this stage. It's about 7/10 now. That's a lot closer than we were on the last time we were within the slipstream range of Mia-san heading into this section of the circuit. Come on, Genesis, let's go. And I knew it as well. 5/10 behind, half a second behind him now as we're heading down the main straight here. We managed to catch up in warp speed, in fact, and we get that move done. And we're coming up towards the closing stages of the straight now, so I'm not too worried of a slipstream re-overtake from Miyasa at this particular stage. So it's looking good to be able to sort of head this pack here. I say pack, it's just a pair. I'm in a good position here to try and keep this 6th spot here as we head into the Nürburgring GP section. Now, as I've mentioned before, if there's an overtake that's going to be completed at this track, it's most likely going to occur on the GP section, and Miyasa is probably coming back within the correct pace for him now as the track's beginning to dry up again. That rain sort of passed over the top of us. It didn't really affect the grip too much, but now that the tracks are drying, Miyasan's pace is probably going to begin improving once again. There's still a bit of spray coming off the back of our cars, so Miyasan's probably not quite back on the amount of pace that he had at this opening of the race, but the track is really not going to be too wet for too much longer. Got to make sure we get a good run out of here, and we do. That gap behind opens up to about 0.6 of a second. That's got to be us safe from a move heading down into the Dunlop hairpin at the bottom of the circuit here. Make sure you don't brake too late. Get it rotated at the apex. First gear for rotation in this car is also really, really good. It works really well. That gap's still about half a second there. We've lost a little bit of time on the exit. We lost a load of time through the Michael Schumacher S with an absolutely shocking run through there. That gap's down to 0.2 of a second now. The pressure's on. Got to make sure we get through here okay. And I turn in way too early. I'll get with the program. God's sake. Absolute tool. And I'll make one of the stupidest mistakes I think I've ever made here at the Nürburgring. I guess aside from bidding it at the dip of death last year in GT Sport, but in terms of the GP circuit, I don't think I've ever made that mistake. I don't think I've ever cut that corner once in my entire history of playing Gran Turismo, and I decided to do it. And one of the more crucial moments that I've had here, and I also make a hash of this corner here and get a load of oversteer, but the track's so narrow that Miyasa can't actually capitalise on that. So I've now got a half-second penalty for cutting a corner I don't think I've ever cut before. Never cut it once in practice, never cut it once in quali, never cut it once in a daily race, and I decided to cut it on the last lap of a championship race when 6th position was kind of riding on it. So I've got to serve this penalty at the one set of penalty gates on this track. Happens to be on the back straight of the Nordschleife, and the Dottinger Hoa. It's probably 500 metres down the straight, so I've got a 2 kilometre straight to traverse, while also needing to slow down for half a second. Obviously not ideal, so we've got to basically extend this gap out as much as possible, and that's what we're going to do through this last section here. I wish this whole section had a name, but it's got all sorts of German names that I can barely pronounce, so we're just going to have to call it the fast-flowing section. But first of all, what kind of marks the beginning of this section is the carousel, which we almost fall out the top of, but we still keep it down into the banking, and we get a pretty good exit. Make sure we keep the car squat on the back tyres, because you can really oversteer on the exit of that corner coming off the rough banking. But now we've just got to focus on meeting every apex, not braking too late, not scrubbing off too much speed, correct gear choice, not climbing the curbs, and not nicking the grass. That's pretty much all we've got to do, which sounds easy enough to say, but it's a lot more difficult in practice. And that moisture on the track is gone now. The track's dried up again, so Miyasan's probably back on the maximum pace. But thankfully that gap behind has opened up to about 0.6 of a second. So if we can continue to gain tiny bits of time through each corner, that gap will open up by the time we get to the Dottinger Hoa, and it will give me the best possible chance of keeping this position after I serve the penalty. Something that's quite useful for me is that we've actually got Miyasan's headlights behind us, so it's illuminating the sides of my car, which makes it a little bit easier to see where the edge of the track is relative to my car. It's already difficult enough in the dark conditions without seeing where the track edge is, so it's quite easy to nick the edge of the grass in the darkness, and that is a mistake I did make in my practice. I've got to try and avoid it in the race. We're getting through here pretty decently. We get a good run through there. That gap's opened up to 0.6 of a second as we head through the roller coaster section. The gap's up to 0.7 of a second now, so Miyasan's not getting the best run through there. Maybe the Lexus isn't quite as good through there as the Genesis is, but the last couple of corners, the most important corners of the Nordschleife in terms of keeping a position down the Dottinger Hoa, got to make sure the gap's as big as possible, and this can be a really big time differentiator. Klein's carousel, and we make a mistake. We have to catch the car, we have to slam on the brakes to stop the car from rotating around. and that gap closes down from what was about 0.6 of a second to about 0.4 of a second as we head through Galgenkopf, and now we're coming up to the penalty serving gate, and he's only half a second behind me now. That's really not the amount of gap that I wish I had at this stage, because not only am I going to slow down for half a second, I'm also going to have less speed for the entirety of the straight, so I've got to maximise the slipstream of the Lexus, see if we can gain and force him... Stupid penalty. Force him into a mistake and see if we can catch this position pretty much on the drag race up to the line, but it's not quite going to happen as we're coming down to the Tiergarten section. That gap's still half a second, nowhere near close enough to get a move done, so the last possible thing I can do, I'm doing every trick in the book, flash the headlights to try and distract him in the braking zone, but he's privy to that particular tactic, and he manages to not fall victim to such a feeble attempt at trying to throw him off, and he is able to keep his well-deserved 6th position. As for us, it's going to be a rather disappointing 7th. Should not have had that penalty. Oh, I don't know what the hell happened on that last lap. But he lost it. Lost my marbles. Good race though. So despite what happened in that race, it was still a really good race with Mia-san, so obviously you can't win them all. But that one, I should have had a much better chance of trying to keep that 6th position there, because that penalty is not a penalty I should have got. Obviously, I committed the crime and got a penalty for it, but I should have committed the crime in the first place, because it's such a stupid mistake. As for the points, you can see if I was able to get 6th, I'd almost have 300 points. 294 for 6th position there. I managed to have 278, so... obviously a bit disappointing there at the end, because I would consider a 290 point score to be pretty out of this world, pretty amazing in terms of my skill. 278 is pretty much the same, but the fact that the 294 was so easily within reach, if I didn't make that stupid mistake, I did come away from this combination with a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. But I think I can at least be thankful that I just didn't bin a lap at the Nordschleife section on that last race there. So hopefully I can improve some of my driving and clean up my act around Nordschleife. So I've had a good race there now. My last impressions of the Nürburgring is no longer a crash in the BMW. It's a 278 point score in the Genesis. But this video has gone on for a while, I'm sorry. I tried my best to cut out as much of the boring stuff as possible and leaving in as much of the good racing as possible, and this was the result without having to need to split it into 2 videos. So that's what we've gone with today. So I'm going to wrap it up here, so do hit the like button if you enjoyed, and do subscribe if you'd like to see more videos and streams from me. Do leave a comment as well. That's questions, comments, and constructive criticism as always. Very much appreciated. But that's going to be the end of this one today, and that means that is it from me. So once again, I do thank you very much for watching. See you later.